When I first saw the mansion, it was hard to shake the unsettling impression that it was watching me. It loomed at the end of a dirt path, its windows dark and vacant like hollow eyes. The house seemed ancient, older than it had any right to be. The wooden exterior sagged in places, shutters hung askew, and vines crawled up its sides like skeletal fingers clutching for something unseen. I didn't want to go inside, but I didn't have a choice. My parents were gone. My sister was gone. The accident had left me as the only survivor, and my grandmother, my last living relative, had taken me in. She was a woman I barely knew. I had met her only a handful of times as a child, and even then she'd been distant and cold. Now she was my sole guardian, and this house, this oppressive monument, was my new home. "Come inside," she said, her voice soft but firm. She stood on the porch, her wiry frame wrapped in a tattered shawl. Her face was pale and sharp, like porcelain left too long in harsh sunlight. But it was her eyes that unsettled me the most. They never seemed to focus on me directly. They always drifted just past my shoulder or at my feet or to the side, as though something far more intriguing stood just out of view. I hesitated. The air around the house pressed against me, heavy and invasive, like walking into a space devoid of ventilation. "Come inside," she repeated, her tone sharpening. "We have rules here. Best you learn them quickly." The inside of the house was worse than the outside. It smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic I couldn't identify. The wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, exposing blackened wood beneath. Every step I took on the warped floorboards produced a groan that seemed too loud, and the dim lighting struggled to fend off the encroaching gloom. She led me to the kitchen, a cramped space dominated by an ancient stove and a crooked table. On the table lay a battered notebook, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. She slid it toward me without a word, her unblinking eyes focused somewhere near my ear. "What's this?" I asked, breaking the suffocating stillness with a voice that sounded too loud. "The rules," she replied simply. "If you want to stay alive, you'll follow them." I opened the notebook, and the first line, written in spidery handwriting, sent a chill to me. "Rule 1, never close your bedroom door at night. They don't like closed doors." I frowned and glanced up at her. "What do you mean by the—" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't ask questions. Just do as you're told." The list continued. "Rule 2, never leave food scraps on your plate. Dispose of everything properly. Rule 3, never stay in the same room as the grandfather clock at midnight. Rule 4, if you hear whispering, don't answer, no matter what it says. Rule 5, don't trust what you see in the mirrors after dark." There were more, but my thoughts had already begun to spiral. "This has to be a joke," I said, shutting the notebook abruptly. "You're messing with me, right?" Her face remained blank. "Break a rule and find out." That night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, the notebook clutched tightly in my hands. The room was sparse, containing only a wooden dresser and a lamp that cast weak, flickering light. The door to my room stood open, just as the first rule instructed. It felt unnatural, like an invitation to something lurking in the dark hallway. I told myself it was just a bizarre game my grandmother played to scare me. But as I drifted off to sleep, the thought that something might be standing just outside the door lingered, refusing to let go. When I woke, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Deep gouges scored the wooden floorboards near the doorway, long and jagged, as though something with claws had dragged itself past my room in the night. I stared at the marks, my stomach knotting. They hadn't been there the night before. I was certain of it. The splintered edges were fresh, catching the weak morning light that crept through the cracked window. The faint echo of scratching replayed in my mind, a sound that had seeped into my dreams. I tried to reason it away. Maybe the house was old and falling apart. Maybe the floorboards had warped overnight. Maybe I'd just overlooked the marks earlier, but deep down, I knew none of that was true. Something had passed by my room, and it had left a warning. The kitchen felt even smaller that morning. My grandmother stood by the stove, stirring something in a battered pot. The smell was thick and greasy, making my appetite vanish. She didn't acknowledge me as I entered, her gaze locked somewhere beyond the steam rising from her cooking. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound steady. "Did you leave your door open?" she asked, without turning to face me. "Yes," I replied reflexively. "But, good," she cut me off sharply. "Remember that." I hesitated, glancing at the notebook still sitting on the table. "What's out there?" I asked in a hushed voice. "Why do we follow these rules?" For the first time, she paused. Her hands stopped stirring and her head tilted slightly, as if listening for something just beyond hearing. "The house has rules," she said finally, "and it doesn't forgive mistakes." The rest of the day passed in a blur. No matter where I went, the house seemed to close in around me, its presence almost suffocating. The rooms were eerily still, every sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Each groan of the floorboards jolted me, and every shadow stretched longer than it should, darker than it had any right to be. I tried to distract myself, even picking up a book to read, but the words refused to stay in focus, as though the house itself demanded my attention. That night I perched on the edge of my bed, my gaze fixed on the open door. My instincts screamed to shut it, to create some semblance of a barrier between myself and the yawning darkness of the hallway. But I couldn't. The fresh gouges on the floorboards near the door were a stark reminder of what might happen if I disobeyed. I left the lamp on, its weak glow trembling against the shadows. Determined to stay awake, I told myself there was nothing lurking outside my room. Yet the house seemed to hum with a quiet insistence, its stillness wrapping around me, smothering my resolve. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the chill seeping into my skin. Then came the sound, the whispering. It wasn't loud, more like faint murmurs drifting through water. The words were indecipherable, but the tone clawed at my senses. It was urgent, insistent, like someone begging for acknowledgement. I froze, my breath shallow and tight in my chest, straining to hear. The whispers were coming from the hallway. Despite every rational thought screaming for me to stay put, I found myself creeping toward the doorway. My heart thundered as I peered into the corridor. The hallway was empty, silent. Yet the whispers persisted, closer now as though they had shifted just behind me. I spun around, but my room remained as it had been. The lamp flickered, its unsteady light casting uneven shadows on the walls. My eyes caught the mirror above the dresser. Something was wrong. The reflection didn't match the room. It was subtle at first, but the shadows moved differently, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something slip just out of view in the glass. I stumbled backward, gripping the notebook in my hands like a lifeline. "If you hear whispering, don't answer," I murmured, repeating the rule as though it could shield me. The words felt hollow, more a habit than a comfort. The whispers grew louder, sharper, tinged with a mounting anger. My grandmother's words echoed in my head. "The house doesn't forgive mistakes." Panic overtook me, and I bolted for the kitchen. I didn't stop until I was bathed in the harsh, buzzing light of the overhead bulb. Panting, I clutched the table for support. The notebook slipped from my trembling hands, landing open to one of the later rules. Rule 9. Never ever leave the house at night. The air in the kitchen felt unnaturally cold, pressing against me like an invisible weight. The light flickered weakly, struggling against the same oppressive force I was. My fingers tightened on the notebook as my eyes fell on the rule about leaving the house at night. The question gnawed at my thoughts. What's out there? And could it really be worse than what's inside? The whispers had stopped, but the silence that replaced them was far worse. It buzzed with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. I felt eyes on me, though I dared not turn to confirm it. My grandmother's voice shattered the tension. "Why are you out of your room?" she asked, her tone calm yet laced with something sharper, disapproval, or perhaps something darker. I heard... My voice faltered. The words caught in my throat. There was whispering. Her head tilted slightly, her unblinking gaze fixed just past my shoulder. "Did you answer?" "No," I said quickly, the denial rushing out of me. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her hands remained tense on the counter. "Good," she said, her voice quieter now. "If you had, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I wanted answers, to demand she explain what was happening in this house. But the blankness of her expression stopped me. Her hands gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white, as though she were bracing against something only she could see. "Go back to bed," she said after a long pause, "and remember the rules. All of them." I hesitated. "What happens if I don't?" Her gaze flicked, just briefly, toward the pooling shadows in the corners of the kitchen. "You don't want to know." I wanted to push further, to press her for the truth, but the light flickered again, and a low creak echoed through the house. Her attention snapped to the sound, her body taut with an almost animal-like tension. Without another word, she turned and left the room, her footsteps unnervingly silent. The next day, curiosity gnawed at me. I decided to test the rules, not blatantly, but enough to try and understand them. I started small with Rule 2 about food scraps. At lunch, I deliberately left a single piece of crust on my plate and placed it in the sink, carefully watching my grandmother out of the corner of my eye. She didn't react at first. She sat across from me, sipping her tea, her gaze distant and unfocused as usual. But as I stood to leave, her hand shot out and gripped my wrist, her strength surprising for someone so frail. "Finish it," she said, her voice low and cutting. "It's just crust," I said, tugging against her hold. Her eyes flicked to the sink and then back to me. "Finish it," she repeated, each word deliberate, her smile stretched tight and unnatural. Swallowing hard, I obeyed, shoving the crust into my mouth without even tasting it. Only then did her grip loosen. She returned to her tea as if nothing had happened, her movements calm and measured. But as I left the room, I glanced back and saw her staring at the sink, her lips moving soundlessly. That night, I decided to test another rule, Rule 3 about the grandfather clock. The clock sat in the parlor, its face cracked, but still ticking with an oppressive rhythm. I had avoided the room since arriving, but curiosity gnawed at me. At 11:50 p.m., I sat on the faded couch, staring at the clock. The parlor was dim, the faint glow of moonlight filtering through dusty windows, casting long shadows. The ticking seemed louder now, each sound vibrating through my chest. As the hands crept closer to midnight, the air grew colder, sharp enough that my breath came out in visible puffs. The shadows in the room thickened, pressing closer, but I told myself it was my imagination, the power of suggestion playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. When the clock struck midnight, the room shifted. The first chime was deafening, a sound that rattled through my bones. The second brought a low groan from the walls, as though the house itself was adjusting, stretching. By the third chime, I realized I couldn't move. My muscles locked, my body frozen in place as a figure began to emerge from the darkness. It was tall, impossibly so, its head nearly brushing the ceiling, its limbs stretched unnaturally, its joints bending at sharp, unnatural angles. Where its face should have been was only a smooth, pale expanse of rippling flesh, featureless and wrong. It moved deliberately, each step heavy, the sound reverberating through the parlor. My body refused to obey the instinct to flee, and I could only watch as it stopped before the clock, tilting its head slightly as if listening to the chimes. Then, agonizingly slow, it turned toward me. The figure stood there, its head cocked unnaturally to one side, studying me. The absence of features was somehow worse than any face it could have worn, allowing my mind to fill in horrors far greater than reality. The room's chill seemed to seep into my very bones, leaving me trembling and helpless. Then, as the clock struck its 12th and final chime, the thing moved. Its body didn't walk, but jerked forward in spasmodic motions, its limbs twisting and bending in ways that defied anatomy. It was coming closer. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice and body betrayed me. All I could do was watch as one impossibly long arm extended toward me, its fingers ending in razor-sharp, claw-like tips. Just as it was about to make contact, the lights flickered back to life, and the figure recoiled. It twisted violently, its body contorting as though in pain, before collapsing into the shadows. The parlor fell silent again, except for the relentless ticking of the clock, its sound now maddening in the stillness. I remained motionless for what felt like hours, my legs numb beneath me. Finally, summoning every ounce of strength I had, I stumbled out of the room, gasping for air. My grandmother stood waiting for me in the hallway. "You broke a rule," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, but there was a tremor to it. A mix of fear and something colder. I just wanted to see," I stammered. "What was that thing?" Her gaze, as always, didn't meet mine. "The house doesn't like to be questioned," she said flatly. "It protects itself, and now it knows you're willing to test it." The days that followed were worse. The house, already suffocating, grew heavier, darker. The shadows moved when I wasn't looking, pooling unnaturally in the corners of rooms. Doors that had been open now closed on their own, and the whispers came more often, their words tantalizingly close to discernible. I stopped sleeping. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the faceless figure, its clawed hand reaching for me. The nights blurred into restless hours spent pacing my room, clutching the notebook, reading and rereading the rules in desperate hope of finding a loophole. But the more I read, the less sense they made. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the open door, and decided I couldn't endure it any longer. I needed answers. I waited until my grandmother was asleep and crept into her room. Her room was starkly different from the rest of the house, immaculate and bare. The bed was neatly made, the floors spotless. The only decoration was a single cracked mirror hanging on the wall. She was sitting in a chair by the window, her back to me. For a moment, I thought she was asleep, but then she spoke. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made my skin crawl. "You're not the first, you know." I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping as though burdened by the confession. "This house, it's alive in its own way. It takes what it wants, and we're here to sustain it. The rules are how we survive, but they're also how it chooses." "Chooses what?" I asked, my voice rising despite the knot tightening in my throat. She turned then, and for the first time, her eyes met mine. They were empty, twin voids that seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. Who stays and who goes? Her words hit me like a physical blow. You knew this? You knew what this house does, and you brought me here anyway? Her face remained unreadable, emotionless. I had no choice. It was you or me, and it's always been you. I stumbled backward, my hands trembling. No, that's not true. There has to be a way out. Her expression remained static, but something flickered in her gaze. Pity, perhaps, a regret. There's only one way, she said. Break the rules, all of them. But if you do... Her voice trailed off as she turned back to the window. You'll see. Her words haunted me as I returned to my room. The notebook lay open on the bed, its rules, staring back at me like an accusation. I thought of the whispers, the faceless figure by the clock, the shadows that seemed to creep ever closer. I thought of the claw marks outside my door, the icy chill that lingered in the air, the oppressive force that seeped into every corner of the house. If breaking the rules was the only way to escape, I'd do it. Whatever the cost, I was getting out. The first rule I broke was the simplest. I closed my door. The sound of the latch clicking into place sent a ripple through the air, as if the house itself had paused to notice. Then from the hallway I heard the scratching. This time it was unmistakable, loud and insistent. Claws raked against the wooden frame, each stroke more deliberate than the last. The door quivered in its frame, and I heard labored breathing just on the other side. But I didn't open it. I stayed on the bed, clutching the notebook like a talisman, waiting. The scratching grew louder, each strike resonating through the room. Whatever was outside grew more frenzied, the sound vibrating through the walls. The whispers returned too, their tone venomous and cutting. Open it. Let us in. We see you. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The voices weren't just outside, they echoed inside my head, burrowing into my thoughts. My body trembled, but I refused to move. I'd broken the rule, and the house was enraged. I knew it wouldn't stop until I pushed further. When the noise finally stopped, it felt as though the house had exhaled. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I broke Rule 2. At breakfast, I deliberately left a sliver of toast on my plate and carried it to the sink. My grandmother's eyes followed me, her expression unchanging. You're testing it, she said, her tone flat. I'm ending it, I replied, though my voice shook. Her lips tightened, her gaze unwavering. You don't understand what you're doing. I know I'm not staying here forever, I shot back. Even as I spoke, the house seemed to groan in protest, the walls creaking faintly around me. The house's retaliation was swift. By the time I returned to my room, the hallway was alive with movement. Rats swarmed the floor, and their bodies distorted. Too many eyes, too many legs. Cockroaches scuttled along the walls, their shiny shells glinting in the dim light. Other creatures, things I couldn't name, darted between the shadows, their forms unnatural and shifting. I backed into my room, slamming the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. For hours I could hear them outside, scratching, squealing, a cacophony of unnatural sounds amplified by the house's acoustics. The notebook lay open on my bed, taunting me. Rule 9, never ever leave the house at night. My eyes drifted to the window, to the darkness pressing against the glass. I decided it was time to break that one too. I waited until midnight, when the house had grown unnaturally still. The vermin had vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence that gnawed at my nerves. My grandmother's door was closed as I crept down the stairs, the old wood groaning beneath my steps. The front door loomed ahead, its brass handle glinting faintly in the moonlight. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, I felt the house react. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, but I turned the handle and pulled. The night outside wasn't the relief I'd hoped for. The chill was biting, sharp, and unnatural, cutting through me like a blade. The yard stretched before me, but the landscape was wrong. The trees twisted without wind, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground underfoot seemed to shift subtly, pulsing in a rhythm that made my stomach churn. I stepped out onto the porch, and the door slammed shut behind me with a force that reverberated through the still air. The sound echoed, and the whispers returned, louder than ever, overlapping and angry. The world outside wasn't an escape. It was a trap. Shadows darted between the trees, their movements too fast, too smooth. The ground beneath my feet stretched and twisted, pulling me back toward the house. My lungs burned as I stumbled forward, falling to my knees. That's when I saw it. The faceless figure standing at the edge of the yard. Taller now, its limbs stretched impossibly long, its presence suffocating. It didn't move, but its head tilted, as if studying me. "No," I whispered, scrambling to my feet. "I'm not going back." But the figure didn't need to move. The house itself was alive, and it wanted me back. The ground beneath me shifted, dragging me toward the porch and the open door that waited like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. I clawed at the earth, my fingers scraping against the unyielding ground, but it was futile. The house pulled me inside, slamming the door shut behind me with a finality that left no room for escape. The whispers became deafening, shrieking in a language that grated against my thoughts, incomprehensible yet invasive. The walls seemed to bend and twist, closing in on me as I stumbled toward the only place that felt remotely safe, the parlor. The grandfather clock loomed in the center of the room, its cracked face a haunting reminder of the rule I'd already broken. Midnight was minutes away, the hands ticking forward with agonizing precision. I knew what was coming. The parlor was colder than the rest of the house, its shadows thicker, oppressive. The clock's hands inched closer to midnight, each movement resonating like a hammer striking metal. My body felt heavy, the air pressing down as if the house itself were trying to pin me in place. But I pushed forward. If this house wanted to keep me, it would have to fight for me. The notebook was clenched tightly in my hand, its pages crumpled and worn. The rules that had controlled me now felt like weapons in my grip. Break them all, I thought. End this cycle. As the clock struck its first chime, the house seemed to awaken fully. The walls groaned with a sound that felt alive, a deep, guttural noise that sent vibrations through the floor. Shadows spilled from every corner, writhing and stretching, moving with a dreadful purpose. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a cacophony. Some angry, some pleading, others mocking. My thoughts felt drowned beneath the onslaught. The faceless figure emerged from the dark, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its limbs were impossibly elongated now, its body shifting and twisting as though it were made of liquid. It stopped in front of the clock, tilting its head toward me in a grotesque mimicry of curiosity. "You don't own me," I said, my voice quivering but resolute. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to the figure or the house itself. "I'm not staying here, not for you, not for anyone." The figure's head snapped upright at my words, and the shadows around it pulsed violently, as though in rage. The second chime of the clock echoed, sharp and resonant like a gunshot, and the figure lunged. I threw myself to the side, narrowly avoiding the swipe of its clawed hand. The floor splintered where it struck, shards of wood flying through the air like shrapnel. The house roared in protest, its very foundation trembling. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the notebook as if it could shield me, and bolted for the hallway. The house wasn't going to let me go easily. Doors slammed open and shut with violent force, the walls narrowing as though trying to trap me. The whispers shifted again, their tone almost pleading now, their words clawing at the edges of my resolve. Stay. We'll care for you. Don't leave us. I forced myself to ignore them, focusing on the front door that loomed ahead like a distant beacon. Just as I reached for it, the air thickened around me and the faceless figure materialized once more, blocking my path. Its limbs stretched grotesquely, filling the space as it loomed over me. "You can't stop me!" I screamed, slamming the notebook into the figure's chest. The pages tore free, scattering across the floor like brittle leaves caught in a storm. The rules lay exposed, their words glowing faintly in the dim, flickering light. The house recoiled. The figure staggered back, its form flickering as if it were unraveling. The walls groaned and cracked, fissures spreading like spider webs as the whispers turned to frantic, panicked screams. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I had struck a nerve. Summoning every ounce of strength, I snatched the torn pages and began ripping them apart, one by one. Each shred of paper seemed to wound the house, its cries growing louder, the ground beneath me trembling. The figure lunged again, but it was sluggish now, its movements disjointed and weak. I tore the last page in half, and the house seemed to collapse inward. The shadows dissolved into nothingness. The whispers fell silent, and the faceless figure crumbled into a pile of ash. The air lightened, the oppressive weight lifting as though the house had exhaled its final breath. I didn't hesitate. I threw open the front door and bolted, stumbling out into the cold night air. The yard was still distorted, the trees swaying unnaturally in the moonlight, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. When I reached the edge of the property, I turned just once. The house was burning, not with fire, but with a strange, otherworldly light that pulsed and flickered like a dying star. Its screams echoed across the night, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I collapsed to my knees, trembling from head to toe. I was alive, but only just. My grandmother's face flashed in my mind, her cryptic warnings, her unblinking eyes. I didn't know what had become of her, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The house was gone, but its scars remained on the land, on my mind, on my very soul. As I forced myself to stand and began walking away, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never truly escape what it had done to me.